When it comes to fat loss, there is one golden rule. One rule that you need to follow and make sure that you are doing if you're wanting to get a fat loss response. You can forget about certain foods that you need to eat. You can forget about even working out at this point before you've achieved this golden rule. You can forget about certain exercises that you need to do, meal frequency, timing of eating, cardio versus resistance training, whatever it might be. None of that matters. None of it if you haven't nailed this one golden rule. This one rule will determine absolutely everything. If you're not nailing it, you're not going to get a fat loss response. If you are nailing it, you are going to get a fat loss response. Everything away from this golden rule can then come into play to obviously enhance your results, make it a little bit more specific to your goal. But so many people still struggle to grasp this one rule and struggle to implement it. I'm going to tell you right now what it is and how to do it. That one rule is simply this. To get a fat loss response, you need to be in a calorie deficit, which means taking in less food or less energy than you are expending. Once you're taking in less energy than you're expending, your body's no longer getting in enough energy through your intake and therefore will need to go to stored energy sources such as body fat to get the required energy that it needs. Without putting yourself in this energy balance, this calorie deficit, you will not drop body fat. So, how do you make sure you're eating less than you're burning? Well, you have a couple of options. Both options are going to require some level of control over your intake and your expenditure. Okay? If you're not controlling these two things, then you don't know what energy balance you're in. If 1 week energy intake's higher than the previous week, and if 1 week expenditure's lower than the other week, you're not going to know where you're at. 1 week you might drop body fat, 1 week you might not. You're just guessing, you're just winging it. So you need some sort of control over the two. So this might look like tracking food intake. This is why so many people do track food intake, let's say through calories and stuff like that, because they can be accurate about how much they're taking in comparison to how much they're burning, and then put themselves in a deficit. But you don't need to track calories. You could just track food through food diaries, through portion sizes, whatever it might be. You need some level of controlling your intake and being consistent with the amount in comparison to controlling your expenditure and being consistent with the amount of that. Once you're controlling these two things, you can then measure your progress. That might be weights, that might be measurements, it might be pictures, it might be all of the above. Once you're measuring your progress and you're measuring controlling your intake expenditure, if you're not making progress, you're not in a deficit. So you need to increase the size of that deficit by either reducing food intake and or increasing expenditure. Go back to your measurements. Are your measurements dropping again? Yes, sweet. You're in a deficit, happy days. No, you need to make further adjustments and increase the size of that deficit again. That one golden rule. Are you in a deficit? Make sure you get your head around this and you understand this, because so many people struggle to actually still understand it. And if you're not dropping bad body fat, you are not in a deficit, and therefore you need to make adjustments. So many people get frustrated and can't understand why they're not dropping weight. And the answer is simple: you're not in a deficit. Whether you might still think, well, I'm not eating that much, or I'm training a lot. If you're not dropping body fat, you're still not in a deficit. A lot of people underestimate how much they're taking in and overestimate how many calories they're actually expending, which again is why it's very useful and important to control and track these things, intake expenditure, because it's very easy, if you're not, to be mistaken by how much you're actually doing of either. Just remember the one golden rule: you need to be in a calorie deficit to drop body fat. You need to be taking in less energy than you're expending. You're not dropping body fat, you're not in a calorie deficit. Right?